One of the laws in John C Maxwell's classic, The 21 Irrefutable Laws on Leadership, is the law of navigation. And this is what it says. Anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. And I want to share a very interesting case study here. In the year 1911, two explorers set out to be the first to reach the South Pole. One of them was a Norwegian. His name was Amundsen, and the second person who led his team to the South Pole, his name was Robert Scott. And these two people had very, very different approaches to reaching their destination and achieving the mission. But one of them could practice the law of navigation, the other did not. Now, before I tell you which was the person who finally succeeded, I want to bring to your notice some of the differences in the approach. In terms of transportation, Amundsen, he used dog sledges that would be pulled by dogs which are found in those Arctic regions. Whereas the British explorer Robert Scott, he used motorized sledge and he used ponies. So this was the difference. The second difference, we can see is that in terms of recruiting the team, Amundsen looked at people who were experts in terms of skiing and who were experts in terms of handling dogs. Whereas Robert Scott never had that kind of a criteria. He was a naval officer and he took people that he was comfortable with. Not only that, he made a last minute decision to include a fifth person on the team, whereas it was very clear by then that they had supplies only for 4 people to last the entire trip and back. And in terms of equipments, what we find is the Norwegian Amundsen, he spent a lot of time studying the condition. He interacted with a lot of Eskimos, and he designed equipments that were the best that he could afford for his team. When you look at the other team, which was led by Robert Scott, you can find that he did not pay much attention to the equipments. In fact, the clothes that they wear were so ill-designed that most of his team members suffered from frostbite. And finally, if you look at the results, because results don't lie, Amundsen's team could reach the South Pole first, and they beat Scott's team by more than a month, and they came back safely. When Scott finally reached the South Pole, he could find the Norwegian flag already, flapping on the South Pole. But the sad story is that even after reaching the South Pole, which was very courageous of Scott, because they really fought through a lot of adversities in doing that, he could not reach back safe. All of his team, they perished on that trip, including Robert Scott. So what are some of the lessons that we can learn from this, and how do we apply the law of navigation, which is anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course? I think the lesson number 1 is, before you set off from a shore to a mission, you need to start with the end in mind. You need to have a plan, and you need to see the whole trip right in your mind even before you start. Secondly, we find Amundsen used a lot of information that he could gather from the locals there, and he converted that into wisdom which he could apply during his mission trip. And this is not something that we find in Scott's mission trip. The third lesson that we find in this whole expedition, and two very different approaches that these two great people led, was that one really knew what's the cost and what's the price that we have to pay in order to achieve this mission. And he inspired his team with the best of the equipments, with the best of the inspiration and morale he could provide. Whereas, we find that, that was missing in Scott's team. And lastly, I feel, now this is a very, very important point, there needs to be a balance between faith and facts. Many a times leaders go just by faith. They just go by their instinct. They just go by their gut. They ignore the facts. I think that's what Scott did. But if you look at Amundsen, you find a balance between faith and facts. And he used them both to take decisions. He used them both to plan. He used them both to strategize. If you just go by facts, chances are you will never leave the shore. But if you just go by, your faith, chances are you will end up becoming a martyr. So we need to have a fine balance between faith and facts. And it is not the team's job, it's the leader's job, because the law of navigation says anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. Hope you learned some precious lessons through this video.